Hello, Zun. Welcome back for another edition of the series Our People Speak. We're here tonight with special guests, Dr. Reverend Anna Frank and Travis Cole. Our People Speak is a series brought to you by Danakanaga in partnership with the Tandem Chiefs Conference, Morris Thompson Cultural and Visitor Center, with generous support from Doyon. So, Dr. Reverend Anna Frank, would you be so kind as to tell us a little bit more about yourself and also how you have been involved with Potlatch and anything you want to share with our audience?
Thank you, Dewey. I learned about Potlatch at a very young age. We've always had Potlaches in Minto, and there are several Potlaches. Like we have, someone might have a wedding party, and nowadays we order cake. But in my day, way back then, we had Potlaches for weddings, birthdays, or maybe be smaller. But usually the big Potlaches were for someone we lost, someone who died, and then our memorial potlatch, which is held a few years later, 2-3 years down the road. But I learned all that from my elders at home in Minto, and so there's a lot to learn about potlatch, and we're teaching that at home in Minto. Like different parts of the moose go to different people. The backbone part always go to the men. The brisket might go to the women. And so we're teaching our young people how to become servers at that time too. And we're still doing that to this day. So that's how I learned it.
Bessie, would you like to share next, Travis?
Well, I was born here in Fairbanks, but I was raised in the village of Allakaket. And growing up in Allakaket, I went to many potlatches. And like Anna was saying, they have potlatches for many reasons. And I remember them saying, like, when a young man gets his first moose, and they would hand out that moose to the whole community. He never keep any for himself, and they have like this potlatch. I think it's like of coming of age. He becomes a hunter. But the ones I remember growing up was the memorial potlatches, and it did take maybe a couple of years, depending on the family, and they could gather up, from beading to buying things like blankets and gloves and everything to hand out during the potlatch. And sometimes they'd have more than one potlatch at the same time. Like there would be a couple of different families that would have a potlatch at the same time. And it usually was during a holiday time, like around Christmas or something like that, where people get time off, I guess, and they could all come to that potlatch there in the village. They try to coordinate it too, probably with other villages, because if they're having a potlatch at that time, they'll try to have theirs in another, so they're not all having potlatch at the same time. That way they could all come and go to each potlatch. And I grew up on the Koyukuk River, and Hughes, Allakaket, and Hooslia were all very close, and so that's where we definitely had potlatches at different times of the year, so we could all visit each other's for those moments. And the potlatch would go for 3 or 4 days, and sometimes it was like they'd have violin dancing at nighttime too, or maybe they play rock and roll or something, like a band would come, and they might have like snowshoe races or dog races, or else basketball tournaments. Sometimes there were young people that might have passed, so they have a basketball tournament at that time, or a baseball tournament, I remember, and it was always the first few days they would they would hand out, they'd have like cover dish, and they'd have all those things going on in the community. But the final night is the big potlatch, the main potlatch, and that's where they get all that good food. People have been saving up, moose head soup and good fish and berries, and make all that good food for the final night, and they just cover the floor. And I remember they'd make good speeches. A lot of what I learned growing up, I'm not really educated, but I learned from elders, and it was always they'd get up and they'd speak, and they'd thank everybody for coming, and maybe they talk a lot about that person who passed on they're having potlatch for, and they share stories about them. And then when they get done giving speeches, they start handing out the food, and cover dish. The first few days, in the tribal hall, they just set up long tables so that way they could just set all the food and people come in, say prayer, and then everybody eat. But on that final night, when they give speech and then prayer, and then they hand out the food in that, circle, always clockwise. And like Anna was saying, there's certain foods that you hand out to certain people. So we always had, as a young man, I always had to listen to the older man who would teach me, like, you take this meat and you give it to the elders, or you give this one to the women or the men. So, I was always directed by an older person to teach me how to hand out the food properly to the right people, And then when we got done eating, they'd always have the cloth potlatch, and that was where they hand out all the beadwork. I got basically everything I got was from a potlatch. Besides my best was my graduation, but they'd give out all these things to families. They always had to give it out to a different family. They couldn't give it to their own family. Like if I made something, I couldn't give it to anybody in my family. I had to give it to somebody else who helped or came from far away or whatever it was. And when they got done handing out all those gifts, because they have names on them, who they made it for, but then they bring in all the personal belongings of the person who passed on, and they just set it out on the floor. And it'd be, their tools, whatever it was, clothes, things that they had in their cash. And it was all their personal belongings. And so I remember they'd always call up their closest friends and people, and they all got to go up first and pick one thing to remember them by. I got my great-grandma's Bessie Henry snowshoes, and that still sits on my grandmother's wall in Allakaket. I remember she smiled and she said, "Don't ever move those." She recognized them, and they're really old. But, I had things like tools and hats or shirts or something from somebody. But once the closest people go up there and pick it, then everybody in the community starts picking one thing at a time until it's all gone. And then that's the final night, after they've given out all that stuff. And yeah, pretty much it for now.
Yeah, Bessie, for both of you sharing a little bit. It almost seems like there's a way of making potlatch. There's almost as many ways as there are to cut a fish. So everyone has their preferred way of preparing salmon, how they hang it up, how they take care of it, if they want to jar it or make it into strips or whatnot. My family comes from Cochranes originally and then moved to surrounding villages, Ruby, Galena area. And when we were having a potlatch for my late grandma Lillian Olin, my mom's mom, I really remember being together and, of course, having delicious food and making all the preparations. What sticks in my mind the most is the singing. And the way we did it for the Olins, together with the Carlos and other families who were honoring their loved ones, is we had a cloth that was tied together in a circle, and everyone could hold on to it. And then there was a bunch of different furs that were tied up to the front. And then I think we had wolverine, otter, beaver, wolf, all tied together, and maybe some rabbit furs too, along with bolts of fabric. And of course, after we sang and danced, all of those were given away at the end too. And even the tarps that the piles of designated gifts were neatly placed on, those were given away too. So where I'm from, Ruby Galena area, that's a little bit about how we have the food together and then singing, and then on the final day, the giveaway. Also, the speeches are what really stand out in my memory. And to me, that's a little bit about how we maintain balance. Maybe at one point we organized with a clan system, and today it's, like you were saying, Travis, where families will take turns almost with honoring each other and making sure that there's that balance when someone goes through a loss and then has that support. Are there any examples you'd like to share from Minto about either the timing or some things that make the potlatch there unique, perhaps?
What I'm going to talk about is when my son Parker caught his first moose. Oh. And we put on a potlatch a few days later. And when you do that, I had to put Parker in front of one of our elders. And that elder, and he has to kneel like a young man does, on one knee, and sit with respect toward that elder. And that elder would tell him of what kind of a hunter he was and things like that. And at that time, my mom gave Parker a brand new 30-30. That was the introduction to hunting. And then we gave a present to the elder who gave advice to my son. And I think I remembered we gave him a pocket knife. Our elder men used to use pocket knives all the time. And so that was one of the things I remembered. Another thing, our memorial potlatch is more toward the clan. For instance, when we made a potlatch for my late husband, Richard, he was Chachalyu. That was the fish clan. And so his clan got presents first. We made presents. We sewed and put things together for Chachalyus. Then after that, there's other people there. We gave away other things too. So we teach our young kids about the clans and where they came from. And a long time ago, that's how the same clan can't get married. You have to pick the opposite clan. And so, like I'm Caribou tribe, and Richard was the fish tribe, Chichalio, Bitzich, and so that's the way it's supposed to be. You marry the opposite clan of yours. And so I think there are some villages around are very clannish. We tell our children this. They grow up with this. And so sometimes when they see young girls look at a nice-looking guy come into the village and what tribe does he belong to? And stuff like that. Our parents know, but they just ask us if we know. So those are the kind of way advice was given to us. And just not too long ago, I don't know how many years ago, we did naming ceremony. And this girl, the family gave their daughter to their other family member. And we gave her a native name, and they put on a potlatch that night too. So those little things like that, it's always a celebration for someone, the Potlaches. So there are so many things to do, so many things to the way we prepare. And who do we invite? So, and we're still trying to do that, us younger folks. And I think our elders taught us well, and we try to keep those intact with our way of life and where we live, and try not to forget that.
Passy. And Travis, is there any memories you have of a certain potlatch that comes to mind, or anything from what Dr. Reverend Anna was saying that made you think of a potlatch-related memory?
Well, first, I'm also Bajista Hutana. I'm Caribou clan, and we went by our mother's side. Nowadays, they pick up their father's last name, but then traditionally we took our mother's clan. So, yeah, I'm from the Caribou clan too.
And so we're cousins.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. We're related.
Yeah, I hear that from the South Fork, that tribe that lived up there, when they disbanded, some went all the way to Minto, and Stevens and Allakaket and Hughes, and so that's when it all started. But yeah, growing up, I remember the cloth dance, like you mentioned. And that's what I remember is when I was a little kid in Hughes, we went to a potlatch, and they had that big old building, that big cabin, and they'd have potlatches in there. And I remember you hold on to the cloth, they'd tie all those cloths together, and we put wolverine and wolf furs on there. And traditionally the men, or the boys, would hold that wolf fur, and you got to shake it. And I remember, they leave the claws in there. And those claws, sometimes they hit you in the leg. And I was a little kid, and it just made me bleed. It hit me so hard. And but you never let go, you just hold on to it tight. And usually, when I was a little kid, there's a lot of people that sang our songs. Our songs don't use drums. I've grown up here in Fairbanks also, so I've picked up a lot of music from the different villages, their songs from Minto and Tanana and Stevens, Tanacross, and they use drums for some of their songs, and that's a lot of songs that I know now. But our songs were always a lot of words, the Athabascan words, Tanaka, and they'd say all about their life, if they're a good hunter, provider, or mother, or whoever they were in their life, they would tell their life story. Somebody would have made a song about them, and it was very poetic. It was, I got a chance to sit down with Susan Pasquan and some elders in Hooslia, and they just broke down all the songs talking about what they were saying, why they were saying this, and it was really beautiful to hear all that. Those first few nights after the cover dish, that's when they always had the memorial dance, and they sing the slow songs, they call it, and we always march in that circle, go clockwise, and there's always be like an elder or whoever's singing. They come out, and just like you were saying before, they stomp their foot for the rhythm instead of drum. They all stomp their foot, and then they would untie one side and they'd put the cloth up on the wall, and then we have I believe they call it like the fun songs, the fast songs. And that's when they would sing songs from, a lot of times from other areas, and that's where in Allakaket, I got the chance to drum, and they said, bring your drum out. And I sang songs from all the different areas that I learned here in Fairbanks, but I remember I was just a little kid then, and I was very inspired by listening to them and how one person with a very strong voice, and everybody be quiet. All you'd hear is their feet moving as they're dancing and the cloth shaking. Nobody would talk, nobody would make noise as they make speeches or they explain the song or sing. And so when I moved to Fairbanks, that's where I kind of felt I wasn't around my hometown anymore of Allakaket and Potlaches. And when I got the opportunity to learn songs, I really grasped that opportunity. And for the last 30-something years, that's what I've been trying to learn and study, was from the different people. And it's so different here in Fairbanks because I've gone to so many potlatches over here at the tribal hall, the David Solomon Tribal Hall, but they're people of Fairbanks, so they're from different villages and tribes, clans, and they all have different styles of doing their potlatch. And so a lot of times I'm just asked to come over and drum, my friend like Sonny Luke or Norman Carlo, or, just pull out our drums and everybody gets up and sings.
So fun. Not only am I starting to get hungry, I'm also just craving that time where we could be together and just sing really hard. And I remember at the Big Dipper one time, kind of like what you're describing, I think it was the Welcome Potlatch for AFN, or it could have been for the Fairbanks 4. Oh yeah, it was shortly after my wife and I moved to Fairbanks from Anchorage, and there was a group of guys in the middle of the arena, maybe like 7 or 8, and then I got there a little late, of course, but I just jumped in and started drumming and singing, and man, what power our people have when we get together and stand tall and show who we are. It really is important. I want to have that feeling passed down to our young ones, and I think it's so important for our kids to see our adults and young parents, and then together with the grandparents and our elders, great grandmas and grandpas, because we oftentimes learn by watching and observing what is going on, and then we start to wonder, I wonder how come they do things that way. And then, of course, over time, maybe things will start to be incorporated or included. I know everyone has their favorite types of dish that they like to prepare. One of them that comes to mind that I've seen back home, mainly during potlatch times, is nonatloda. It's like a mixed berry with white fish and fat. It's so delicious and filling, and it's one of those special dishes. Has either of you ever seen where, in combination with this gathering, people will not only have prayer but also burn food?
Mm-hmm. It's mostly, I think, in your area, downriver area. And I encourage my children to do that. My granddaughter was really missing her grandfather. It was really hard. And and she was away at school. I encouraged her to get food, little bits of pieces, and put it in a paper bowl. And when you're really lonesome or struggling, you burn this food, and that's part of the grieving process for her. And she did that a whole year. So we burn food for different reasons. And another thing I would like to talk about is our villages had potlatches during holidays, Christmas, New Year's, or whatever. And I would remember 2 elders. One would get up and start a debate. And then when they were done, the other elder, and these were mostly men, another elder man would get up and return debate with this other elder. I never ever knew what they said, but it was very powerful. And they almost sound like they were angry with each other. But they would mention, in my area, if we still do that, we would mention Ptarmigan Hill, or if the man came from Nenana, they would mention where people hunt and just stuff like that. The debate was about that. And I haven't heard that since I was a little girl. So those, some of the things we forget. And maybe if we had a debate, it'd probably be all in English today. But we're trying to get the language back, and it's very slow. So that's one of the things that I remember growing up.
Yeah, I remember we would burn food. They have a prayer, and like Anna said, have little bits of, dry meat, dry fish, stuff in there. And they always put it in the fire, and they say antla, and a lot of times it was for many reasons. You make a prayer for at the potlatch, or when you get an animal, or when you feel scared. You hear something, or something. They the old word huklani. That's one thing I don't hear anymore. And to me, it was always teaching us that boundary of respect. You respect nature and each other's. I remember if someone's arguing with one another, my elders would say something like huklani, and not supposed to treat each other's like that. And if we don't treat animals right, like huklani, you're not supposed to do that. So when there would be moments where we would have to do something like a prayer, and that would be like burning food and saying a prayer for it. And but I think a lot of the potlatch was really that spiritual moment of healing, because it helped families get closure. My experiences through Fairbanks here even is seeing all these families that come and they lose somebody. But as natives, we're so connected to one another, and we understand that everything has a spirit. And so when it's kind of hard, because being a native person, when we lose people in this community, we all kind of feel it. But at the same time, that's a strength, because we all support that family. When a family loses somebody, there's always people there to help them, emotionally support them, or else just help them organize things because they're going through a hardship. And, just how we treat the animals. I know when, like, we get moose and I help cut up moose and pack moose, it's like I'd have vivid dreams that night. And it was every time I get that blood on me from cutting up moose so much, I'd always have vivid dreams, and that really gave me a realization that, the spiritual connection we have to all the animals that we hunt, or the land that we hunt on, or whatever it is. Sorry about that. I thought I turned it off. But they, prepare that food with love. They prepare everything. When they sow things, they prepare it with love and goodness in their heart. And then when we share this at the potlatch, we're sharing that goodness too, You see people smiling and laughing while they're having all this food that was prepared for them with love, and I think too, in a way that I've got an opportunity to help with things. It's my way of saying goodbye to my friend or my family, because we lose people suddenly, and we never had that opportunity. But that first potlatch you have when they're putting them to rest, or they just gather and everybody helps them, and then a few years later when they're done preparing for that potlatch, and then they have that potlatch, that's, to me, is when you get that final closure, because that's when my mourning is kind of coming to an end. I start thinking of all the good things about my late friend or family member, and helping celebrate their life with other people, thinking about how they're looking down on us and smiling, seeing all these people there for them. To me, it's always been that, and it's been hard during this pandemic because we've lost so many people in the last few years, and we've had like just basically no potlatches, and I feel for the people when they don't have that opportunity to complete that feeling of having a potlatch, and laying them to rest. So I'm hoping when the pandemic gets better and people could gather again, I could sing and drum for them, because it's very powerful being a drummer when you're the center of that energy the moment they're singing, and everybody's singing and moving, and I could just feel it all around me, and I always take my responsibility as being a drummer very, very, very passionately, and try to be respectful, because I know that I'm not out there just drumming. I'm helping other people with the moment of healing. It's a process that I believe that we all need to go on into the future, because we're all human. Originally we call ourselves Dana or Dene, or how people pronounce it, but means we're people, we're human, and into the future we're gonna still have to hold on to our identity as Native people, Indigenous, but the one thing that really separates us from the rest of the world is traditions that we have that are handed on by our elders, teaching us how to respect one another and the land, and having these moments where it's ceremonial, where we could heal.
I think we've lost a lot of things, like when we do our dances. There's a dance where the men all line up together and the other side would be women. And I remember as a young girl, they wouldn't let us dance in some of those songs because a lot of times they were hunting songs, made after hunting and the animal you're after. So us young girls didn't dance. And so we haven't, right now, the back and forth, we call it the back and forth dance. It's mostly just for fun. But our people was very, very spiritual. And everything we were talking about, some things was kind of like taboo. And we don't know those things as well today. And so there's certain things we're not supposed, like you talked about, Hutlani, you don't talk about that. In my area, it's Itzga. You don't talk about it. It really might happen, and you don't want to bring something into your life that disrupt your life and other people's life just by mentioning. So I think we have a lot of work to do yet in training our young people. And so we're continuing to work at it, and hopefully We may not be as good as our ancestors, but we're sure trying to keep up the tradition.
Yeah, I was told one time, tradition is tradition is tradition. The elder told me, and that's one thing I loved about elders is they tell you something, and you're like wondering what are they talking about, but it's like a question that keeps echoing in your head, something they said, and then later on in life, it suddenly is an epiphany. You understand what they were talking about. If they just gave me the answer, I'd probably not remember what they taught me. But, it was important for him to tell me that, I guess, because I come to understand now that, when the times are changing right now, so many different things are changing, and it's great. It's good to accept new ways of life and looking at things and respecting people, like the women's movement. Over many generations, they had it hard in America, and, the civil rights movement and all these things. But, when it comes to our tradition, I've come to learn that whatever the elders teach me, when it's that's tradition, I got to keep it that way. I can't mix it with my own political views or personal feelings about things, because there's a reason why, and it usually takes years for me to really understand why they taught it to me that way, or why it probably helped our ancestors for thousands of years survive here in Alaska. And times have changed, but I still keep whatever I do the way I'm taught. I'm always blessed when I have the moment to sing and drum with Minto, or sing and drum with Tanana, or Stevens, or Tanacross, or Nalato, these people who showed me songs, and they sing them different ways, they have different beats, when they enter, it's a little different. There's many different things, so I try to remember that and not mix them up with the other villages' style or the way they do things, and I've had young people try to say, well, we should do things this way. And I'm like, I'm just going to stick with whatever the elders taught me. Unless the elders come to me and tell me to change something, I'm not going to change it until an elder tells me so, because I believe that's the power of the Spirit. When you start changing things, you change the spirit of it, and we as today, 2022, we still look upon our traditions and our cultures to give us that strength as Indigenous people, young people who are working in this world now, whether we're in an office or wherever we're working, those values keep us strong. I know that my grandma said, well, what would your grandpa do? And so I always thought my decision making was kind of like, well, my grandpa would always think of what's best for the family and the tribe, so when I became older and I decided to start living that way, more in a traditional sense, I wouldn't think of myself and how I feel about things so much as I'd do that, and then it would, further down the line, I realized that was the best decision I could have made that day, because it's benefiting me now. A lot of what we do as Native people, it doesn't have instant gratification. You don't get instant results. But in the long run, it all starts to pile up to more and more success, because like for us, we had luck. It was bad luck to talk this way, the Haklani things. Luck today is looked at differently, but for us it was, you're lucky if you got that moose, or you got full net in your fish, or full freezer, or something like that, and that luck was from how you treated the animals in the land. If they saw that you were being, bad about it, you're doing Huklani way about it, you'd wind up having bad luck. And for us, that was very vital. I think about my ancestors. I boil it all down to just a family in the middle of cold Alaska trying to survive, and they don't have power or running water or anything. So if they had no luck getting food, that means people starve. If they don't take care of their food right, then people get food poisoning. And I hear a lot of stories about that where my late ancestors, great uncles or whoever, passed on because of starvation or getting sick from, not preparing food right, or just went old, and this unforgiving Alaska, they could just take people all the time through the ice or, exposure.
Yeah, very rich ideas and complex histories that we have, and how we interpret them and how we talk to them with our kids and future generations is something that's very personal and very important to consider with thought and intention. When I'm raising my daughter, she's 3 going on 4, just the other day there was a piece of food and she threw it. She just randomly threw it because she's a little girl, and I said, we're supposed to take care of the food and we're not supposed to throw it because it's not taking care of it and showing it respect. We want to make sure that whether it's a piece of meat or rice or whatever, we don't just treat it that way. You got to be aware of what you're doing. And I've heard many examples like that where you keep your cutting rack clean, and where you hang up and dry your fish, you got to make sure that it's clean and well taken care of, and using the best available that you have, whether it's fresh poles or sharp tools. These are ways that I've been instructed to live in a good way and to try to have the best chance of not only survival, but the best chance to be successful. And I believe that's a strong way we can carry forward these traditions. We use outboard motors now and rifles, and we incorporate these new tools and technology, but it's, to me, the way I view it is for the same purpose. We help each other, we work together, we show our kinship ties. And I think that's something that we could continue to do and to show our next generations. As we're getting into some of these large topics, and I'd be really curious, one of the guiding questions I've been asked, if we could focus on, is when say that you're pulling one of your grandchildren aside, or one of the people that you care about in your life, what is one piece of advice that you would want to share with them?
I think how, I'll pick on my little grandson. He's 12 years old, and because he's always with me. And what I want to share with them, I go and do with them. If I want him to become a good hunter, then he must go out with us to find out what means hunting, what you have to do. He watched his uncles and how they butcher moose and how they take care of their tools and their guns or whatever. He has to learn about safety. And if you have grandchildren, they must follow in your footsteps, and you have to be a good person to follow. You don't put your family in danger and stuff like that. So that's how I've been teaching my grandson. And one thing I'm really happy about is he's picking up on the native singing, drumming. He has become a very good drummer, and he'll be watching the elder men and how they drum. And one of his teachers is Luke Titus. I tell him, you got to follow Luke in. When we come into the hall dancing, you got to follow Luke. He's your teacher. And that's how our young men learn to drum as they follow an elder. So those are the things that we're still working on. And he knows a lot. And I remember his mom being pregnant with him, and I told her, if you want to teach your child how to sing native songs, I say, you put that tape recorder on your tummy. And she did that with Dax. And now he just loves to sing native songs. That kid is going to be a leader someday. Mm-hmm. We're teaching him how right now.
My son Clifford, I used to sing to his mom's tummy. Sit there, rub her tummy, and sing to her tummy all the time. And he loves singing and dancing and drumming. He's more into the dancing. My daughter's very shy to get up and dance, but Clifford loves to. And I think I would like to pass on to my son that my two sons and my daughter, that working together. That's one thing that really connects us. Growing up in the village, I know during Potlatch time, everybody works together. It's just this magical musical thing that's going on where everything's moving, but everybody knows what they're doing. They know all their part. The people are hunting and gathering, and the people who are preparing the food. I know I was basically a little worker, so in the mornings we'd go down to the freezer house and we'd sit there and saw all the meat. And we didn't have a bandsaw, so we had to saw it by hand. And, there's a lot of hard work in the cold, so, we'd just take turns constantly going out and sawing that meat. And then we'd gather it up and we'd bring it to all the houses. Somebody tell us where to go, and we go in there, and then they say, put it right there. And then they start cooking away, and we go out and we start chopping wood, splitting wood, and all the young boys and everything would be splitting wood and packing in wood to all the houses, and then packing water. In Allakaket, we didn't have, I don't think they still have running water, and so we'd go do all that work for people, so that way when they're busy cooking and helping one another, they don't have to worry about their wood or water or where the meat's coming from. So that was my duty as a young boy, was to do that part. And all the older men would tell us how to do all this stuff, what to do, when to do it, and I'd like my son to understand that he needs to listen and pay attention, because there's so much things going on. It's easy just to be like, well, what do I do? It's like, well, pay attention to what they're doing and just follow along. And I always try to acknowledge those people who taught me too, because like Luke Titus is one person who's taught me how to drum, but it's also, people of my own age, because Israel Silas and the late Harley Titus taught me how to do Minto-style drumming, and then the late Chris Grant of Tanana, and, Donnie Stevens and Jerry Isaac and, Paul Mountain, they all teach me songs, and it was always just, there's no book for it. There's no real recording of how it all done, so we just have to be there and pay attention and participate by helping. And that's what I hope my kids learn, is that there's no higher purpose than service. When you help serve your community, whether it's just you're handing out bowls of soup, or you're the one hauling the water, or you're the one hunting or cooking, it's all very important. And there's no really one small duty that is unimportant. Everything that we do, the end result is this moment when, for me it was always because it was so hard when we have funerals. The hardest thing that I ever have to hear is hearing a mom mourn for her lost child, and I unfortunately I heard that a lot growing up, so it's the one thing that really drives me in serving, whether I'm serving at a potlatch, or like I serve on the board with Anna of FNA, I'm always got that in my heart that we got to try to do something for our community. And sometimes it just seems like it's a small thing, but we know that in the big schemes of life, it's a piece of the puzzle that's important.
I think in our culture, my aunts became my teachers. In our culture, our aunts are the women's teacher. And the uncles are for the young men. The uncle become the teacher. And everybody else teaches whoever. If you come into a place, you teach your children that anybody can discipline you, especially if you get mischief and get in trouble, It's not just your family, it's the community. So that's how we all learn. So I just want to thank you for doing this, because we don't get to talk about this very much and very often. And we need to start expressing ourselves and teaching our young folks what it was like for us to grow up.
Yeah, Basi, because, when I was a small child, there were many elders, and I could hear them singing all the time. And I didn't have to be a drummer or a singer or anything. I could just shake the cloth or go potlatch and help out, and just excited to go there. And when they start singing, I was blessed when I was a teenager back in the 90s. I had the opportunity to see all the Mento elders out there singing, and Tanana elders, and now there's fewer and fewer and fewer elders, and I come to realize one day I'll be an elder, and how many of us will be singing, and how many of us will know what to do, and having this video here, it's great because, I love hearing from Anna, my elder, to be able to tell me things, remind me things that I've never thought of. I mean, like my uncle, my late Uncle Art, he say, I like it when you sing, because I look in the hall and everybody smile, and so it was one thing that really encouraged me when I first started learning how to sing, because I made him proud. And so, it's those things that elders teach us that we need to record it as much as possible, because you could hear it from me, but when you hear it from our elders, it's a magical wisdom that is hard for me to explain. I might just say, like, yeah, it's cool when you drum, man. Everybody's having a good time. It's not as powerful as what my uncle said. It was very simple, but it was pure, and it still sticks with me today.
I can certainly relate to that as someone who wants to see our traditions remain strong, and sometimes feeling overwhelmed with the weight of change and how our communities are, and wanting them to be maybe as they once were. And also my perspective that I bring is having an open heart and an open mind, and asking for guidance and blessings. And I think when we have that way of being where we are trying to embody this Cholitsin, or this love for others, it's going to be the way it's supposed to be, and we're going to get that guidance and love and support that our ancestors bring when each step we take. And I'm just so grateful for this time and sharing. This is very personal and unique to each of you, so this is going to help a lot of people. And our intention here with this series is to create a safe space, an open space for sharing and bringing people together virtually, And here at the Morris Thompson Center, in the coming months and weeks and years, we hope that this can be a place for further discussions and knowledge sharing to continue. So I do have hope for our future and how we are with our families, and just want to again show my appreciation for you both as our special guests tonight. I'm Dewey Kathlia Hoffman, your host for this evening. Make sure to follow Morris Thompson on social media, and if you're feeling willing, you can always donate to this nonprofit organization by navigating to the website. Look forward to seeing you all next time. Nabasi aderoya ni galachtenik.